Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. MeatEater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. MeatEater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your guide to the whitetail woods. Presented by First Light, creating proven, versatile hunting apparel for the stand, saddle, or blind. First Light. Go farther, stay longer. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by public land mountain buck expert Nathan Killen to dive deep into what he's learned about the behaviors, trends, and tendencies of the biggest, oldest bucks around. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and our Camo for Conservation initiative. If you're not familiar with this, every purchase of First Light's whitetail camo, which is the Spectre pattern, if you buy a jacket, if you buy a hat, if you buy a base layer, whatever it is in Spectre, a portion of the proceeds from that sale get donated to the National Deer Association to help them do good things for deer and deer hunters. So that is pretty darn cool. And this week, we've got something pretty darn cool for you on the show as well. We're continuing our, I guess I don't have a really good name for this series, but we're diving in this month to the personalities and the tendencies and the behaviors and the quirks of mature bucks. And not just like, kind of mature bucks. I'm talking like old bucks. What do these bucks do? These deer are different than everything else out there on the landscape. They are the trickiest, they are the wiliest, they are the toughest, they are the survivors. And because of that, I think they fascinate a whole pile of us. We are, I think many of us cannot stop thinking about these kinds of bucks. We can't stop trying to put together the puzzle pieces, put together that next move in the game of chess to try to catch up with that buck. They are the ultimate quarry. And so this month, we're trying to peel back a couple layers of the onion to understand why these bucks do what they do. How do they do what they do? What are they thinking? Where are they going? What are they doing? And the people that are going to help us figure that out are those deer hunters who have had the very most experience with that kind of buck. And today we have a guest who absolutely checks that box. His name is Nathan Killen. He is a diehard deer hunter from the state of Virginia. And he hunts big woods, big mountain, public land there in VA, in Ohio, and elsewhere. And he has done it to a level of, a success level. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here. He's been more successful than most anyone else I know in that kind of habitat. And he first came up on my radar when our good pal Andy May said to me, man, Nathan gets it done. Like, he is a top-tier deer hunter, doing it in really tough circumstances in a very different place than most people we talk to. We got to get on the podcast at some point. And this was years ago, and it just didn't work out for whatever reason, but finally we were able to put the pieces together, and Nathan is here today. He has terrific level of experience with these kinds of deer. He's got great insight. He's hunted old bucks, like way older bucks than I've ever got to chase. As you'll hear here soon, he's got experience, a lot of experience with not just 5-year-old bucks, but 6-year-old bucks, 7-year-old bucks, 8, 9, 10. He's finding deer like this And he's not doing it on like a 1,000-acre private, super managed farm. He's doing this on public land. He's hunting 8-year-old bucks on public land. There's some things we can learn from a guy like that. So that is our plan today. Now, I just want to, with all that being said, remind us all of one thing, though, which is, and I said this last week, I'm going to say this every week because I think it's really important. In this deer hunting world we live in these days, big deer get a whole lot of attention and praise and excitement. And right, for good reason. They're all those things I just mentioned. They're fascinating. But they're not everything. And if you were to ever let a big buck or old buck or any of this kind of stuff, an obsession over antler size, if any of that ever gets in the way of your respect for these animals, of your fun that you have while hunting these animals, if it gets in the way of your relationships, your friendships, your family, if any of those things happen, that is a problem. And it's super important to me, as I've gone through this myself, to remind ourselves that big bucks aren't everything. And if you are not at a point in your hunting journey where you are chasing deer like this, that is fine. Do not feel any pressure to do so. If you want to listen today, awesome. You're going to learn some things, but don't feel like you got to go out there and chase a deer like this. If you're still learning, man, be where you are. Enjoy where you are. Get good at where you are. If you have no desire to hunt a deer like this, if you just want to get out there and kill some does or the first deer you see because you want to fill that freezer, man, that is awesome. I'm really glad you're out there doing it. Keep doing it. Keep having fun. Feed your family. Who cares about these big old deer? If that's not your cup of tea, do not feel bad about it. Do not let anybody else's choices make you feel bad about that. Hunt your own hunt. And I think with all that said, in the pursuit of big old bucks, especially these biggest, oldest deer, these super mature deer, it's easy to let those obsession type tendencies in us deer hunters to kind of take over, right? If anyone's listened over the last couple of years, you've heard my own experience where I've gone maybe too far down this road to the point where I was losing some of the fun. I was so obsessed with the end result, trying to kill one of these deer, that I was letting it, make me feel bad whenever I didn't have that success, make me get, not necessarily depressed, but overstressed for sure. It made me, discount the time that I should have been spending with my family or my friends. It took me away from a lot of the things that make deer hunting as special as it is. So I've had to have a perspective shift in recent years where I think I've found now a healthy balance between appreciating and chasing these big old deer, which are fascinating and fun and a heck of a challenge, but at the same time not letting it take over the whole thing and making sure that I'm giving proper priority to my family, to my friends, and the relationships that I have all around hunting, giving back to the landscapes, making sure that this is a whole picture thing. It's not just trying to kill the biggest, oldest deer. It's trying to have a fun, challenging hunting experience. It's trying to put food on the table. It's trying to nurture important relationships and share the outdoors with the people you care about. It's about giving back to the deer and the wild places to make sure that these things continue into the future. That is where at least I personally am today, and I hope that if you're somewhere in the midst of this journey yourself, that you'll think about some of those things and just be careful maybe not make some of the same mistakes that I've made when I went too far down this path. Remember, it's about the process, right? It's the hunt. It's not necessarily just the end result. So keep that process fun. Don't obsess over, do I fill the tag or not, as much as did I do everything I could? Did I do the right things? Did I have fun along the way? At least for me, those are the things that in the end really truly matter. And if you can do that, it's funny how the end result tends to follow. So that is all a long-winded way of saying we are talking about big old bucks today, which are super cool, and we're all going to learn a lot today. I'm going to leave you with 2 quick plugs before we get to my chat with Nathan. Number 1, we do have another episode of 1 Week in November out on the MeatEater YouTube channel. Speaking of big old bucks, you're going to get to see me recover a deer I talked about last fall, which is that Nebraska buck. He was a big old buck. Huge neck on him, huge body, really cool deer. Very exciting ending to this story there. So check out, that is episode 2 of 1 Week in November. And by the time you're listening to this now, there's probably going to be 3 episodes. So please, if you haven't yet, head on over to the MeatEater YouTube channel. Check out 1 Week in November. It follows myself, Tony Peterson, Spencer Newharth, Clay Newcomb, and Giannis Putelis as we're hunting deer during the first week of November. all over the country. It's a good time, so check that out. And finally, we're coming up on our 5th Working for Wildlife Tour event, which is down there in Mississippi. And we are going to be planting trees. We are going to be planting food plots, and we're going to be removing invasive plants, all on public land down there in Mississippi in the DeSoto National Forest, doing some good stuff for deer, turkeys, all sorts of critters. And I just want to say thank you. I've already heard numbers of how many people have signed up, and it is a big old pile of folks coming down to volunteer their time during hunting season. I'm pretty sure the season's open down there in Mississippi, I'm guessing at least. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate that you're willing to give a little bit of your time on a weekend to give back to these resources, these critters, these places that make all this good stuff possible. So just letting you know that I'm giving you a big virtual high five, a handshake. Can't wait to meet you. Can't wait to see you, tell some stories. We're going to have a whole lot of fun, and we're going to do some good work for wildlife. And I can tell you from experience that, having that kind of, putting in that kind of work, it makes the hunts that follow that much sweeter, because you know that you were kind of part of everything that led up to it. You gave back, and now you can take and feel pretty darn good about that deer you bring off the landscape or the fish you pull out of the lake, whatever it is. So now, without any further ado, it's time to get to our next guest in this big old buck series. We got Nathan Killen. And we're going to hear some stories about some 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-freaking-year-old bucks, which is kind of crazy. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. All right, here with me now on the line, we've got the one and only Nathan Killen. Nathan, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, buddy. Sorry it's taken so long. I know Andy here had reached out to me. It's been 2 or 3 years ago. And during that time, I was actually doing a lot of podcasts and stuff, and I was kind of had gotten burnt out on them. So, and I declined then, but here I am now. So,
hey, no worries. I'm glad that we're finally making it happen, and better late than never. And sometimes
That's
when you
right.
gotta wait for something, it's that much sweeter when it actually happens. So,
yeah.
I'm looking forward to this. The reason why, Nathan, I especially wanted to have you on now at this point is because we're starting a series this month of September. There's a lot of folks that are kicking off their hunting season maybe right now or quite soon here over the coming weeks. And I wanted to do a deep dive into the critters that fascinate us the very most. I think for most serious deer hunters, it's those biggest, oldest, gnarliest, most mature deer that keep us up at night, right? And from everything I've seen from you, videos and podcasts I've listened to and things I've heard from friends of ours, mutual friends of ours, you've got almost a sixth sense when it comes to what these old public land mountain bucks want to do. You understand them better than a whole lot of people out there. And so that is why I wanted to bring you on here today to talk about that, to share with us what you've seen, to share with us the behaviors you've witnessed, the quirks and personality traits and tendencies that you've picked up over the years as you've scouted for these kinds of deer, as you've watched these kinds of deer. And of course, you've killed a whole bunch of them too. So that's my hope for the game plan today. Does that sound like something that you're into talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I eat and dream and sleep about,
Yes.
So just like a lot of you guys.
Exactly.
Matter of fact, I've spent most of my life obsessing over the darn things. So,
yeah, we're on the same page there. So what is it? There's a whole bunch of reasons why I obsess over a deer like that. But what is it for you about those oldest mountain bucks out there that make them just like stick in your craw and make you think about them late at night and every day, every week of the year? Why is it that these oldest deer, these biggest, oldest deer, stand out for you in your world?
I think it's just their nature. I mean, they're quirky animals. They're not like the rest of the deer. They do things totally different. So, and each and every one of them are different between them. They're not only different from deer, but they're different from each other, and just have such different personalities and do things differently. So it's just always a riddle or a puzzle that you're trying to figure out, and that's one of the biggest attractions that they are for me. There's plenty of just deer out there that we can go out and hunt and stuff, but they're not nearly as difficult to figure out or get within bow range like these big older age class bucks are. So I think that's what the attraction is for me. And plus, once you kill one of them and you walk up on his lifeless body laying there and realize what you've got, I mean, they look different. They're just a different animal. So, but once you do that, it's your runt after that.
Yeah, man, they are. They're impressive on so many fronts. It's
Yes.
like you said. There's the mental side of the back and forth, the mental chess game you've got to play, and then to your point, like physically, you can't help but just be kind of taken aback when you actually see a truly old
Yes.
buck in the flesh. I mean, they're just. I mean, I've wanted to make a point, in these conversations and when I talk to folks, especially when you've got newer hunters around, to not make someone feel like they should feel pressured to try to, target a deer like that, right? Like any deer is an incredible accomplishment. It's a heck of a challenge for a lot of people, but there's certainly nothing wrong with getting excited about those deer when they do get to that point. And like you said, like once you do go down that road, it's really hard to turn back.
Yes. Yeah.
From your experience, when do you think, on average, a buck kind of switches into mature buck gear? Like when I've heard a lot of people talk about this, and I think I've seen it too, where, when a buck becomes like truly mature, they almost become a different species. It's like a different animal from all the rest of the deer out there. At what age in your neck of the woods would you say that usually happens, when there's like a big shift in behavior and how they act? Is that, what age jump do you think that happens at?
I think that would be, as far as behavioral, 4.5 on average. And body-wise, it would be 5 or 6. I think our bucks in our mountains show their age a little bit later in their life than, say, a Midwestern deer does. And I think that it has a lot to do with just the food.
Sure.
They just don't have as good a food here in the mountains as they do in the Midwest, where, you got corn and beans and everything else. So just be like a person, I think a person that has a lot more food available to them, they put on weight more and they'd show their age a little bit more. And mountain deer tend to stay leaner, But, but as far as mentality, I would think 4.5, to 5, somewhere through there. So that's mostly what I see anyway.
What's I know it's got to be a lot harder and maybe impossible in the areas that you're hunting in Virginia and Ohio and stuff like that compared to someone in, the Midwest. But have you ever, put an estimate on a deer as far as age that got up past that 5 years old, 6 years old? Like, where you'd seen it year after year or had pictures of any of these deer? What's the oldest buck you think you've been able to like get some time with hunting and chasing? I'm
probably hunting one of them this year, to be honest with you.
Really?
I've hunted a lot of bucks in the 7 to 9 year old range. And I killed one. It's been 2019. I think he was 8.5. He was just an ancient buck.
Wow.
And man, you could look back through my Instagram pictures and see pictures of him, but he was just an absolute horse of a deer. And, but yeah, every year I've always got, 5, 6, 7 year old deer to hunt. Matter of fact, this year, the biggest buck that I'm hunting, he is actually only 4.5 to 5.5, but he's the most impressive deer. And then I got a 6.5 year old that I'm hunting. And then I got a buck that he's anywhere between 8 to 10 that I'm hunting.
Cool.
So,
wow. So you said that the biggest jump, like the biggest change is like somewhere around that like 4.5-year-old period.
Yeah.
But is there any, between that 4.5 and that 9 range that you mentioned there, or whatever, or 10, is there any other major change? Like, is there another shift from 7 to 8, or is there another tier up there at the tippy top for those very, very oldest deer when it comes to like they start to act different? Like, do those 8 and 9-year-olds do something different than your 4 and 5-year-olds on average?
Yeah, I would definitely say on average they do. They just become extremely reclusive. It's almost like they don't even associate with the rest of the deer herd. They just have their it's like they live a completely different or separate life from the other deer, and those type of deer are very, very hard to locate. They just kind of lurk around in the shadows, and they're even hard to pick up on trail camera a lot of times because they just move differently and use the areas differently, and I think it's on purpose to avoid other deer. So if you've got your trail cameras focused on the majority of the deer sign, like most people do, then those bucks will live undetected, and it takes special, I wouldn't say special tactics, but it takes special thinking outside the box, you might say, to be able to put yourself in position to get one on, on your trail camera, or even more yet, see one, so.
Yeah. Do you have any example that comes to mind of a deer like that? I'm just curious if there's a buck that you could use to paint a picture of like what one of those alternative lifestyles of these oldest bucks might look like. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I can think of one right off the bat. Nobody ever killed this deer. As far as I know, he lived to probably, and who knows, the darn deer might be still alive now, because he hasn't been seen. No trail camera photos of him in 2 years now. But 2 years ago, the deer was probably 8 to 9 years old. And I've got 2 sheds off of him. I've got a couple buddies that have some sheds off of him. Man. And he lived in a fairly hard hunted area. And nobody ever seen that deer, and other than just a few sheds, and every now and then somebody getting a trail camera picture of him, you would never knew that he even existed there, But the topography and just the habitat there kind of lends itself for a big buck to, be able to do that too. So
what was that topography like? What kind of place did that buck hole up in?
Well, I really don't want to speak too much about this particular deer because there is another one in there right now.
Fair enough.
But, he just lived in higher elevation, and he lived on the north side of a mountain, and it was just, very remote from everywhere else. So.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. MeatEater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. MeatEater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24th, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
So one of the things you mentioned, these bucks, when they get a lot older, they become more reclusive. But one thing I've heard a lot in the Midwest is that these really old bucks really not only become reclusive, but they tighten up their core area more and more. You hear about these bucks like living in smaller and smaller and smaller areas. In this big woods mountainous habitat where I'm imagining some of these bucks travel quite a lot, does that happen with these big old deer by you too?
Yeah, but now that I think that really comes back to personality of bucks too. Some of them are roamers and others are homebodies, and I see that a lot too. I've seen older age class bucks that have a lot larger home range than others, and then some their home range is really small. Matter of fact, one of the bucks that I'm hunting this year, he has actually 2 bucks out of the 3 that I'm hunting this year have really small core areas, and they hardly ever leave out of them. As a matter of fact, one of them, his core area is so small that if I had to put a size on it, probably less than 200 acres. And from probably early spring up until 1st of November, he hardly ever leaves that.
Wow.
And but now once he does leave it, he doesn't come back till springtime, but he doesn't go very far. One thing that changes where that spot is the foliage. Basically, once the leaves are on the tree, he's there, and once they're gone, then he's not. And he just shifts probably about a half a mile, and that's where he spends pretty much November, December, January, February, March timeframe.
What would be, and again, I'm asking for a rough estimate here, but on these mature bucks in the places that you hunt, if a small core range, like you mentioned there, is like 200 acres, what would be like an average core range for like the mature bucks you typically, are chasing around? Is it substantially bigger than that, or kind of in that neck of the woods?
Yeah. I would say, what you've read about all your life, a good square mile would probably be pretty average for most mountain bucks. Some of them are going to be larger than that. Matter of fact, I think some that I've known have probably had home ranges, up to 4 or 5 square miles. And those deer are extremely hard to catch up with.
So you would prefer the homebody buck that's got the tight core range?
Yes. Yeah.
Just because you know where it's going to be.
That's right. And I prefer to hunt those type of deer. I don't really spend much time on a roamer buck. I mean, because I'm a working man. I don't have that much time to invest in them to hunt them, so I've got to put my effort into wherever or whatever buck I feel I've got the best chance at killing. So, and obviously one that has a small core area is going to be the one I'd pick.
Yeah. So let's talk about one of those, or not one of those, but let's talk about a home for a super old buck. If you had like a paint brush set and a canvas in front of you, and you were going to paint the perfect core area home range for a 7-year-old mountain buck in your area, what would be the setup, the habitat, the topography that you would envision being like that ideal place that you could absolutely imagine a big old stinky buck wanting to live in? I'd love to hear like what that picture perfect thing would be. I imagine that might help folks understand what to look for when they're looking for that kind of deer. So what in your mind would that be?
Just a lot of change in topography, obviously, as far as elevation and structure to it, You can have too busy of topography, because if the topography is too busy, in other words, you've got too many compounding terrain features and too many ridges, too many saddles, too many benches, then you have too many places for him to live. So, just a good elevation change, maybe 1,000 feet, that way. And once you get on up into the upper part of that topography, it's going to be, really rough and rugged. And then you have some nice secondary ridges that flow down out of that. And if I could draw up the perfect scenario, it would have some kind of farmland at the end of, or at the lower elevations of that, because one thing that I like to see in the mountains is, we depend really on our acorn crop. And if there's no acorn crop, then the deer can be really hard to find. So if you can find areas that back up against some kind of farmland or something. No, we really don't have agriculture here. We have a lot of cattle, a lot of open fields, stuff like that. But, if there's no acorns, then the deer's going to make their way onto, grassy type areas. So if you can have a blend of both of those, that would be perfect. A nice farm down low, and you got a nice big high mountain ridge back in behind you, with some finger ridges that lead down into those type of places. And around here, the thick areas is mostly mountain laurel and rhododendron. So a good mix of that with some hemlock and stuff, and a couple of really big drainages, that he would use.
Okay. And do you need to have, I know you mentioned that some years you don't have the acorns. Are they ever going to post up in places where there's not oaks? Or are there oaks kind of everywhere in your area and they're dependent on them? Or are there going to be some areas that just don't have them at all and then they're deer deserts?
No, there's oaks actually everywhere. There's not a hillside around here that does not have oaks, and predominantly red oaks, chestnut, and black oaks. We do have several white oaks, obviously, but they're mostly in the lower elevations, and that's generally the ones, if they're going to bear some acorns, that's the ones that's going to be like the big feeder oaks that you see out in the edge of pastures and fields and stuff like that. So, okay. But there's we've been pretty fortunate the past probably 5 years. We've had a pretty good acorn crop. It may have not been an abundance, but there have been acorns around. So it's not been too hard on the deer, and it hasn't been too, hard to locate them. But now, back, previous years before that, I can remember several years in a row that there was no acorns, and that's not a good situation for the deer. And I don't, some people like that because then it forces all the deer to the grassy areas. And if you got private land, then that can work out pretty good for you. But most of us we're hunting public just like everybody else. So so that's what I'm saying about the finding public land that backs up against some kind of farmland. So if your deer have no acorns, you can at least know where they're going to and hunt accordingly. Yeah.
So let's go back to this imaginary big old buck home. You painted a good picture there of what that home might look like. But let's talk a little bit about like where his bedroom is in that home. Mm-hmm. I am at least imagine there's a lot of scenarios where there's a deer herd spread out over an area like this, right? There's some does and fawns. There's your doe family groups. There's some younger bucks. Let's say there's I don't know what the actual age structure looks like in the area you're hunting, but let's say there's a satellite buck or two that's in that 3 or 4 year range. But then you got that one, old salty guy who's 8. What does that 8-year-old's bed, hypothetically, or typical spots he would bed, how would that look different than where that 3 or 4 year old buck might end up getting in this scenario you painted earlier? Could you give me some obviously this is all hypothetical, but if you could paint what that top tier bed would look like for the biggest, oldest versus the next tier down?
He's going to be up in the upper 1/3, on average. Now that's not always the case, because there again, some areas, and I personally like to choose areas that have more than one older age class buck. And obviously that gives you more of a chance to encounter one. And whenever that's the case, then those bucks are forced to choose different areas. So, I would think the buck that's the most aggressive or the most dominant in the area is probably going to choose the more premium type area, that he likes the best, and kind of force everybody else to choose other areas. But, it's just like one of the areas that I'm hunting right now. It actually has some upper elevation, but surprisingly, both the big deer that I'm hunting there are using the lower elevation. And that's a little bit different than what you see you know, but you got to hunt them where they're at. And that just goes back to personality. You know, some bucks, you know, they're just all different. But on average, I would say that most mature bucks is going to be bedding in the upper 1/3. You know, and you hear that a lot, and it is true. You know, and I also found that generally, whenever I find a big deer, he is on the north, east, or any combination of the two slopes. And I think that it's because most of your family doe groups are on the south faces, and they like their seclusion, and they choose, you know, those type of areas that has less deer in them. Plus, it's cooler, you know, most of the year, and you know, that's just where I find them. So I think they're more comfortable there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what about, you know, the wind direction? How is that impacting that bed decision for a buck like that? He prefers the north side because of what you just described.
Yeah.
Can wind influence that at all, or is he going to stick to that because
yeah. But most of our ridges here, or main mountains, run east to west. So you have secondary ridges that run off the south side, and you have secondary ridges that run off the north side. So there's always bedding opportunity, you know, but most of our winds is coming out of the west. So if I've got a secondary ridge running off the north face, and it goes down there, and a lot of them will have a saddle in it, and then it'll kind of knob up, you know, create a knoll, and then it'll drop straight off. Well, if you've got westerly winds blowing across that, if you'll notice, and you get in there scouting during the wintertime, you'll see their beds off on that eastern side of those secondary ridges. And, you know, a lot of times they'll move over on the western side of it too. You know, maybe if it's really cold and late in the evening, you know, you've got the western sun shining on that western edge or what have you, they'll move because of it. But generally, you'll find them on the east side of those secondary ridges coming off the north side. So,
okay, yep, that makes sense. Now, we talk a lot about how mature bucks bed and unique things that they want. Something you don't hear as much about, though, is if and how mature bucks feed in unique ways compared to younger deer. Have you noticed anything like that?
Oh,
Have you
yeah.
noticed some trends on that front at all?
Yes, shed hunting will really open your eyes up to stuff like that. And the reason that I say that is because, you know, years that we have a lot of acorns, I'll use that as an example. You know, you'll, during the winter time, which is my favorite time to get out and scout, you'll be scouting, shed hunting, and most people are going to come across these areas that are really tilled up. I mean, it looks like they've been 8 or 10 deer, and they've just tilled up an area, you know, sometimes a few acres in size, because they're feeding on the red oaks, you know. But you never find big sheds in those type of areas. And so what I've started doing is I will still look in those type of areas, but I will focus more on areas like little hidden hollows and stuff where you can tell that just 1 or 2 deer have been feeding, very little feeding sign, and generally that's where you're going to find the bigger sheds and stuff. So that tells me that those big bucks, again, are separating themselves from the other deer, you know, especially outside the rut. Now, during the rut, obviously, you know, these big bucks, they're going to be frequenting, you know, areas with higher doe populations. But aside from that, that's not the case. You know, they feed separate, they bed separate. And you know, if you can imagine, you know, a buck bedded at his bachelor pad, it's just him. You know, he gets up right at dark, he feeds a little bit, and there again, he's still by himself. And, you know, of course, once it starts getting closer to the rut, then he's going to start making those big loops and stuff, checking out the girls and stuff like that. And they're going to be laying down sign. And that's where people's going to start seeing their sign at. So that's where they're going to start hunting at. That's where they're going to start putting up the trail cameras at. And they're going to be getting nighttime pictures of them. But in reality, those bucks are not there. You know, they're off in a totally different direction, you know. So, you know, they're bedding separate and they're feeding separate outside the rut.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them so hard to locate.
So continuing that line of thought then, what about how they're traveling between those two places uniquely? So again, I've heard, everything from, the faint trail versus the large trail to just above the bench to just below the bench to the way they might use the just beneath the ridge versus the tops of ridges. Like, what are some of the trends you've seen with how these deer are actually traveling across the landscape? Because it's pretty easy these days to read topography and get a sense of how most deer want to travel across the landscape, right? Using some of those terrain features in predictable ways. But is there anything unique about those 6, 7, 8-year-old bucks where they go against the grain or against what we would expect?
Yeah, that's another thing that makes them so hard to set up on, and most hunters don't kill them, is because most of these older age class bucks, when they do move through topography type spots that we choose to set up in, they generally don't travel through them like 90% of other deer. They will skirt around it, and a lot of times, that it'll be on the downwind side, or maybe it'll be on the side that has the most cover. But there'll be clues left in those type of places to let you know that they're doing that. You gotta have the mindset to look for it. They're still going to leave those big scrapes, and you'll still see big rubs and stuff like that in the traditional spots that deer are moving through. And the reason they're doing that is they're leaving their calling card, letting everybody know, hey, I'm here. But most of that sign is done under the cover of darkness. But outside of darkness, those bucks are kind of skulking around or skirting around all that stuff, And I've seen it so many times, especially hunting benches. Everybody loves good benches and stuff. And I used to be really bad for setting up on the bench because that had the heaviest sign on it. It had the biggest rubs, had the big scrapes, it had the heavy deer trails. I mean, we've always been taught that's what to look for, But you set up in those places and you never see the truly mature bucks move through those places unless he's in the company of a doe. But I started, when you're out there scouting and stuff and you're looking, you're not only looking at the bench, you're looking below the bench, and you'll find yourself above the bench, and generally you'll find those lightly used trails with a few decent rubs along those. So what I started doing is kind of splitting the difference, which is another mistake, but sometimes it works out. It depends on how close the sign is. But, you set up to where you can shoot the bench and you can shoot below the bench. Yeah. Well, like I said, sometimes that works out for you, but most of the time the buck will be too far below the bench, and the best thing for you have done is just went ahead and committed to hunting below the bench or above the bench, whichever one is the right spot. But yeah, you should always commit to in other words, commit to one travel corridor instead of trying to cover both, unless they're within bow range, Yeah. So I hope that makes sense to everybody out there.
Yeah, it does. I think, to me at least. Do you look at every big, terrain feature in that kind of way? So if we're thinking of a bench or a saddle, do you always assume, okay, they're going to be off it a little ways and then play off of that? Or are there some situations where you're like, nope, in this one, I'm going to hunt to shoot right at the saddle, but on this one, I want to be 60 yards off?
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, can you give me a little bit more insight into how you make that decision? Like what the specifics would be to get you on it versus off it? Because I know we got to choose one or the other, but how do we make that decision the best?
A lot of it's just going to be experience. And a lot of it also how everything ties into that. Once you see these bucks move through these type of areas, you're going to be able to start picking that stuff out. But you're going to have to be able to put yourself in that position and actually see it with your own eyes. And once you do that, then you're going to gain the confidence to one, put yourself down there, and two, you're going to be able to see it. And because once you see something happen, it kind of helps predict it the next time. We're hunting their tendencies is what we're doing. So the more times you tend to see him do something other, the more it's going to help you to make that decision to hunt off of that saddle or bench or whatever. But then there are times whenever you want to hunt the heavy sign, and I feel like that is right around that peak rut time whenever bucks are really, giving up their guard and putting themselves, out in the open more, but now I warn you, a lot of older age mature bucks never do that anyway. They don't put themselves in those situations. So, but the best way that I can answer that is just experience, hunting a lot, and whenever you do come up on a nice saddle or something other that has the all the good sign that you like to see, don't set up on it. Set up off to the side. Make yourself do that. Just go down there and look. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to see some kind of sign that he's leaving behind that he has moved through there. And those type of spots require more patience too. I'll be real honest with you, because you're not going to see as many deer as you're going to see up on that bench or coming through that saddle. So you a lot of times you'll question, are you doing the right thing? But if the sign is showing that he's coming through there, you need to put your time in there and just trust your gut, and eventually it will happen. And once you see it happen, then you'll gain the confidence to start doing it more often.
Yeah. So with that in mind, one of the things that I wonder a lot about hunting in a situation like you're in, that putting time into a specific location and the balancing act there. Here in the Midwest, super high deer densities. If I hunt a spot once or twice, there's 20, 30, 40 deer that, might pass through there and smell me if I'm not careful about what I did. In your neck of the woods, I'm assuming that, it might be days before the buck you're after passes through an area. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But how do you think about that kind of volume of hunt decision for a specific location like that when you're chasing one of these really old deer? I'm assuming those really old deer, don't put up with a whole lot of human pressure. So I would imagine that's something that you're worried about. But at the same time, to your point, you need to be willing to put in some time into place for them to finally come through. How do you think about that? Or what does that look like for you when weighing those two sides of the decision?
To be honest with you, I try to avoid pressured areas. I think that is one advantage that I have here in the mountains of Virginia. We don't have the hunting pressure like some of the Midwestern states, But obviously, I'm not going to hunt where everybody else is going to hunt. And that's one reason that a lot of those older age class bucks avoid those type of areas that most, everybody's seeing the sign in, they're setting up there. So they're encountering human scent. They may even see people in those type of places. So that's another reason that they're going to avoid those type of spots. So, but one thing that probably goes against the grain of a lot of conventional thinking or things that you've heard is that hunting pressure makes bucks go nocturnal, and that's actually not the case. They're either nocturnal or they're not. And the reason I say that is because a lot of the older age class bucks that I hunt, they're nocturnal, and they've hardly been hunted. They hardly ever see a person, and they're still nocturnal. So that's not what's making them nocturnal. It's just their personality. But hunting pressure, what it does is it moves the deer around and makes them avoid areas. So that's the type of spots that you want to start seeking out, the type of places that they're traveling through to avoid other people,
So that brings to mind the question of what does happen for you when you find one of those nocturnal bucks. And he's nocturnal not because of pressure, but because he's just that way. Do you just move on to a different deer?
No.
Or, okay, so how do you hunt a buck like that, an old deer who just is naturally nocturnal? In my world, I would think, well, I'm just not close enough to his core area then. If I'm just getting nighttime pictures, I'm not close enough. Is that the case where you are too, or something different?
Oh, yes. Yes. No, that's exactly what it is. These older age class bucks, if I could paint a picture of how their daily movement would be, they do move throughout the day, but it is very, very short distances. And really and truly, if you're not within, especially, coming up through September, October, 1st of November, if you're not within 200 yards of where that deer is bedded, and in most cases, I'm going to say less than that, you have almost no chance of seeing that deer. So you have to, and that's the important part of winter scouting. You can learn so much about individual bucks, and that's something else too. Once you start hunting individual bucks, you will accelerate your learning of older age class deer exponentially once you start doing that, because you're forced to think differently. And scouting during the wintertime, once you find a specific buck that you want to hunt, and you go in there during the wintertime shed hunting, trying to find his sheds, really picking apart his core area, or trying to find his core area, that's the most important part. And you just start piecing everything together. You're trying to find every bit of evidence that you can that particular deer is leaving behind. And you're able to paint a picture of where, most likely he's, spending his daytime hours. And then once you figure that out, then you start picking out the places that you think that you can have encounters with him, So it's really not that difficult. I know that it sounds difficult, and having the encounter is difficult, but figuring out where you need to be is not that difficult.
Yeah.
And it just takes a lot of scouting, and the best time to do that is during the wintertime.
How do you have any system for keeping track of all of these data points, or is it all in your head? Like when I say data points, I mean like all the things you're scouting and noticing, all of the things that you're picking up when you're out there hunting and observe something, all of the trail camera photos that you get of these specific bucks. Do you track it in any way? Do you journal? Do you have spreadsheets? Do you have any kind of way to organize this, or do you just keep it top of mind?
No, I just keep it top of mind. I mean, I think about the darn things year round. Now, I do use my mapping apps. I use Spartan Forge myself, and I will mark key features or key points, that I think that I need to remember, and something that I feel like is important. And that those type of things, weigh heavily on where I feel like that I need to set up on him, or where I think that he's at. So. But as far as journaling, no, I don't journal. I'm sure a lot of guys do that and have, find good use out of it. It's just something that I've never done.
Sure. Tendencies. We talked about a number of different ways we can try to pick up on a buck's tendencies. And one of the things you mentioned for a lot of these old deer is that they just do not move a whole lot away from their bed in daylight. But there are a lot of outside factors that deer hunters like to debate about how they might impact a deer's decision to get up and move on his feet. Stuff like temperature, wind, moon, precipitation, barometric pressure. Have you seen anything like that uniquely influence old bucks getting up and moving during daylight? What's it look like in your neck of the woods when it comes to that? Is there something that really does make a difference, or is it all kind of, a bunch of hype?
I personally like cold bluebird skies, and that's whenever I see most of my movement. I've never been a very big fan of rainy days. I have just not seen that many deer on those type of days. Now I do like hunting after a good front moves through, and of course, now one of the bucks that I'm hunting this year, and this is one of the only deer that I've actually seen this with, but it seemed like he likes to move on days with some precipitation. I do get him moving a lot, but he's one of the only deer that I've ever noticed doing that. I don't think that our deer here in the mountains, I see, YouTube videos and stuff of guys in the Midwest hunting beans and corn and the snow, they're hunting times with a lot of snow. It's just pouring the snow and the deer are just piling into those type of places. You don't see that here in the mountains. And I think one reason is just because we don't have the right type of food to make them move on those type of days. I think that our deer are just better off to hole up and wait it out and not expend any energy. And once everything clears up, then, move after the front has done a move through and things kind of start warming up. So.
Okay. That makes sense. I get that. So what about time of year? A lot of folks don't like the rut for hunting the really old deer, especially when they're trying to hunt one specific buck, because it's hard to make predictions about what they're going to do. But in in the scenario we've been talking through, that also might be one of the only things that gets one of these deer moving a little bit earlier. When do you think the very best time to kill a deer of this age is in the mountains that you're talking about hunting? What's that? If you could pick like a week, what's that very best week?
A week, I'm going to say first week of December. I love October, and I think that's a great time to kill a specific deer. But, I'm like a lot of others. If I'm hunting a very specific deer, November is not my favorite time to do that. If I'm just trying to kill a good deer, then, of course, November is my favorite time.
Yep.
But, I see a lot of the older age class bucks on their feet the first week of December. Trail cameras prove it. Just hearing people talk about, that they've seen some giant, somewhere that they had never seen before, and it's always during that time period, But that first week of December is excellent, and even up to Christmas, you'll catch them out moving around quite a bit during that time.
What do you think that is? Is that just, just trying to get the feed on and pack on some energy before before the real heart of winter picks up? Or is it that like post rut trying to catch that very last, doe that cycled in or something like that?
Yes. Yeah. I don't think our winters are tough enough for them to be on any kind of a feeding frenzy during that time period. I feel sure that it's rut related, because you catch them on scrapes during that time. It's like scrapes reopen up. Matter of fact, one of the bucks that I'm hunting this year, I caught him on a very specific scrape numerous times through December and even up into January, almost to February.
So the rut brings up I mentioned, or I thought about asking this earlier, but what about how these really old deer partake in the rut? Have you seen on average that these oldest deer get going sooner or later? Have you found one phase of the rut or another is when they are more active than the other deer? What's that look like for you? Does anything stand out?
Yeah, seems like the middle of November. Seem like younger age class bucks, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, they definitely get started earlier in the rut, and it's just like teenage boys. They're excited. They're not educated. And these older age class bucks, they've been through all that, so they really don't start showing up and making their presence known until generally middle of November, basically when the does are ready, and I really believe that a lot of these older age class bucks are, that they kind of have their, what's the word I'm looking for? Reputation, you might say, in an area, and the does know that he's there, and I believe a lot of the does seek them out And that's another thing that makes them older age class bucks so hard to kill and even see, is because they're not having to do anything to get with does. A lot of times the does, I feel like, go looking for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all of that said, then I feel like what I've been trying to do here is kind of paint a picture of like what these old bucks world looks like, how they operate, what their tendencies are, what some of their behavioral quirks are. And you have so much experience with these types of deer, this age of deer, that you've been able to provide a lot of interesting insight into that. But the next question that this kind of leads to then is, okay, so they do this and this and this, and they don't do that, that, and that. Well, how the hell do you kill one of them? Given all of that.
Yeah.
And so my next question is just like patterning one of these deer, like trying to figure out how to actually set up on a specific old buck like you're describing. And you mentioned you're after like one or two really old deer like this year. And I don't know if you could use one of these deer as an example, or if you just want to use an old deer from the past as an example. But I would love to hear specifically, what the steps are for you to put together, an actionable plan for a buck like this. You mentioned, doing the winter scouting. I know you use trail cameras. I know you're studying these maps and you're thinking through some of these different, personality traits of these deer. But I'd love to kind of hear some specifics about what that looks like and what is enough information for you to then say, okay, this is the time, this is the place, I'm going to make my move. Could you walk me through either a specific example or a hypothetical like that?
Yeah, I'll talk about a few different things here. This is going to be kind of a smorgasbord of things. One thing that I do that helps me is I run my trail cameras on video mode all the time. You wouldn't believe what you will learn about a buck just by running your trail cameras on video mode. And I'll give you an example. One of the bucks that I'm hunting this year, the one that I was saying that I had on the scrape, through December and January. Well, in one of the videos, I actually seen him use the bathroom, leave turds right there in the scrape. Well, I went immediately and looked at those droppings, and I learned to identify his droppings versus every other deer.
That's next level.
So whenever I'm in there shed hunting and scouting, I'm able to identify exactly what trails this deer has been on, what trails he has not been on, areas that he has been in and areas that he has not been in. So it's just stuff like that. And even, on the inside of his right main beam, he had a sticker that was about probably 2 inches long. I didn't find his right side, but I was able to locate his left side. But I just started analyzing the rubs and stuff in the area, and I was able to pick out what was mostly his rubs. Now, you can't, identify everyone, but, some are going to have that marking on it,
Yeah.
So it's just really looking at everything through a microscope, if you want to call it, and just analyzing all the sign that you're coming up on, and eventually you start to put together a picture of where this deer is using, and something else about these older age class bucks is a lot of times they may be feeding in the same general type areas, but a lot of times they bed in a totally different direction. So, keeping that in mind, you're scouting, you're seeing the most heavy deer sign, and the direction that it's going back up into. Well, you need to check that out, but you also need to check out in other directions too. And you'll soon realize that a lot of these older bucks, they're coming from completely different directions. And so that brings up another thing too. A lot of times, especially whenever you have agriculture low and bedding up high, and these deer are coming off these secondary ridges down into these agriculture or farm type areas, throughout most of the season, older age class bucks, their movement is going to be in parallel with the other deer. In other words, they're going to be moving top to bottom and vice versa, just like the other deer are. But they might be just off the trails. They're not going to necessarily be using the same trails, but they're going to be moving back and forth in the same direction. But the closer it gets to the rut, the more that's going to change from parallel to perpendicular in a lot of instances. In other words, those bucks, instead of traveling up and down, once they start looking for does, they're going to be cutting across those secondary ridges. And it's just a lot more efficient for them to locate does that are coming into estrus that way. So, just given the time of season is going to have a bearing on where I want to hunt that deer. And my winter scouting, of course, is going to put me in the right locations, because I already know if I kill this deer, I know what trees I'm going to kill him out of, So, except for early season. Now, early season was a little bit different because of food. But once the leaves come off and we get into November and then even into December, I know where he's going to be.
So you mentioned cameras on the top there, and you mentioned that you run them on video. I've heard you say in the past that you run maybe 75% of your cameras on scrapes, and that you run your cameras year round or close to it.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to confirm that's true. And then part 2 of that would be, can you elaborate a little bit more on where you're positioning these cameras? I think a lot about when I'm setting cameras, not only trying to locate the bucks I'm after, but also not spooking them, also not, putting them in a place where I'm not going to spook them, coming in and out if I have to do that. I might be thinking about other hunters. But you mentioned like you're hunting where there's not pressure. And so these deer very rarely encounter people, and maybe they rarely encounter cameras. So I'm curious, does any of that cause you to do something different with your trail camera strategy or placement or anything like that?
Yeah, I place my cameras in areas that I, for the most part, do not intend to hunt, because all I want to know is I just want to verify that he's there, and I want to know what he looks like. My scouting is going to tell me where I need to hunt him. I don't need to run trail cameras back in close to his core area or anything like that. And the type of, and like I said, I run most of my cameras on scrapes. I'm looking for those annual scrapes that have multiple licking branches, multiple bucks are going to be hitting, and but those are type of scrapes that I put my cameras on.
Anything as far as the height of your cameras, or are you okay just putting them smack dab in front of the deer,
no,
8 feet away?
No, I try not to do that. I don't want my cameras to be obnoxious. I want them to, because now some bucks do shy away from them. There again, it goes back to personality. Some of them it doesn't bother them at all, but some it does, and I just don't take that chance. I make sure that my cameras, I probably put my cameras probably around 8 feet high, and there again, I put them in locations that I can, sneak in, check them, and be able to get back out without messing up my chances of killing that deer. Okay. Because checking your trail cameras and stuff, and you're leaving humans sitting around, and that's not going to cause him to go nocturnal, but that will make him not want to be there during daylight hours in that particular spot. There's a difference between a nocturnal buck and where he moves during the daylight versus during the dark. Truly, there's no such thing as a nocturnal buck, because they all will move, but it's just they won't visit certain areas during the daylight. And I find that scrapes are areas that they don't like to visit during the daylight. Not where I hunt anyway. Now, Ohio is completely different there, but now here in Virginia in the mountains, from my experience, I get very, very few trail camera pictures of bucks in the daylight.
Do you have any guess as to why that is different in Ohio versus where you are?
Not really. I mean, I don't know why. I've got a guess on why my bucks here in Virginia don't like to visit scrapes during the daylight. I feel like that if it's a very specific thing, that those bucks don't want to be standing there for some reason in the daylight. They'll be around, because I've actually seen this. I've been hunting a scrape before, and I have seen a buck feeding under a white oak or a red oak, whatever, just an oak. out from me 75 to 100 yards and be there for, an hour before it gets dark. But he would never venture over to that scrape. But as soon as it gets dark, you can hear him walk straight over to it, and he'll work it and everything else, and then he walks off, But it's almost like they don't want to go to a very specific thing like a scrape during the daylight. Now, why they want to be that way, I don't know.
Strange. And is that unique to those mature bucks, or do you see that with like all the bucks in your area?
No, I see that. It's bucks even as young as 3, but especially once they start getting 4 years old and older, then yeah, for sure those deer.
Interesting. You mentioned scent, leaving your scent on the ground when you're walking in check cameras. These days it's kind of trendy within the world of like DIY deer hunters, especially public land deer hunters, to say scent controls for the birds. You just got to play the wind, right? There's a lot of people that kind of like brag about how they don't practice any kind of scent control because they can understand the wind really well, right? But I noticed that that's not the case for you. You seem to take it more serious. Can you explain?
I'm going to answer that really good. Listen. You spend all this time, money, and effort to scout and find these places. Why in the world would you be so lazy to skip one of the simplest things? Scent control. To me, it's just laziness. But at the same time, it's one of the most simple things that you can do to protect where you're hunting. You need to be able to get in and out of that spot undetected. If you can't do that, then you're going to burn that spot out. And here in the mountains, it takes 2 things that is one of the most important things to be a successful big buck killer here in the mountains, if you want to say, is persistence and dedication. And a lot of times that means putting a lot of time in very specific spots. And if you can't get in and out of those spots without leaving a bunch of scent and trashing up the area, then why would you're going to be sitting there for hours and days on end and just for naught. So why would you skip that step? Because trust me, I have been doing this for years. And you can play the wind all you want. I play the wind. But you cannot always predict where the deer is going to come from. That is impossible. They don't always come in with the nose to their nose to the wind, and they don't always come in with their the wind blowing from their tail forward. You just don't know. So the best practice is to practice scent control to the best you humanly can. I just don't understand these guys that don't take it any more serious than what they do. I've heard that a lot. So
yeah, I'm right there with you. If there's so many variables outside of your control when you're trying to chase these deer, why wouldn't you want to have one of those things you can control that you do have 100% control over? Why wouldn't you take advantage of that part to put a little bit more in your favor, to have that little insurance policy? Like you said, it seems like an elaborate excuse just not to do the work.
Yep, that's right.
So speaking of impact we make in the woods, there's scent, there's your cameras, there's how many times you hunt. We've talked about all those so far. But what about the impact that something like calling or rattling might make when it comes to these extra mature mountain bucks? Would you ever call or rattle to a 7-year-old or 8-year-old buck in the mountains of Virginia or Ohio? How do you see them reacting to that kind of thing when we're talking about like a super mature deer compared to like a 2-year-old?
In Ohio, I would definitely call to those deer. I've had positive. Now I don't do any rattling, but now I've had some positive experiences with bucks in Ohio. But now here in Virginia in the mountains, I don't call to them. The only time that I ever call to a buck here in the mountains is if he is going away from me, or in other words, if I know that I'm not going to get an opportunity at him, I'll blow a grunt call at him a few times in hopes that to turn him and get his curiosity up and and bring him down there. But other than that, I don't do any blind calling. I don't do any rattling. I just prefer to sit silently,
Yep. All right, Nathan. I've got 2 last questions for you before we wrap this up. Kind of want to tie a bow on this. If you had to, and I'll give you a second to think this through, but if you had to write the 3 commandments of Nathan Killen when it comes to understanding and hunting old bucks, like your top tier salty dog deer, what would those 3 commandments be if you had to drill down to the very 3 most important things you understand about these deer or that you must do to get a crack at these deer? What do you think those 3 things would be? The things that if they remember nothing else today, they have to remember these 3 things. What would those be?
Number 1 would be hunt them differently. They're different. The chances of you killing more than 1 mature buck in your lifetime by hunting deer is very, very slim. You have to hunt them as individuals. Number 2 would be do your winter scouting. I see guys scouting right now. They're scouting their hearts out, and I'm not. My scouting was done before the leaves came on the trees. The only thing that I do this time of year is run my trail cameras, and they're in low impact areas, and I'm only looking to see what he looks like now and to verify that, yes, he's still alive. So I stay out of the woods, and I'm going to say number 3, persistence and dedication. The older age class bucks are not pushovers. It takes time. And a lot of effort. You just got to keep going and keep going and keep going and hunt smart. Don't get lazy. Don't get sloppy. You've got to be persistent, and you've got to be very precise at how you hunt these deer. So,
yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to get those carved in stone, and I'm going to send out copies of the tablets across the country for folks to make sure they don't forget this.
Yeah.
But tell me this, Nathan. I got to believe in your many years of chasing these deer and getting to know these old bucks. I'm sure they've taught you a whole lot. I'm sure that you've probably learned a whole lot from the deer themselves. So I'm curious, if you could think back, is there any one specific big old buck that stands out in your memory as having taught you either the most important lesson or the most lessons? Can you think back to any specific example of a deer that taught you something really, really important? And if you can think of a buck like that, could you share with us, the story of what that buck taught you and how you learned that lesson?
It would probably be a buck that I didn't kill. I've got some sheds off of him, and I would get pictures of him up until about September, and then it's like he just disappeared. And then, but yet, once season was over, I was always able to locate his sheds, and they would be there. And but I guess that lesson would be is most of the time, whenever you think that they're gone, they're not. It's just they're doing something different than what you think that they're doing. And that just goes right back to if you're not, to doing things differently to get on these older age class bucks, because they're different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a hard thing to put into action, though, for a lot of us, right?
Yeah,
because you want to see deer, right? And like the sign often tells you like where deer are, and your observations often tell you, oh, well, there's deer here, and it's really hard to avoid, what 95% of all your observations and everything else tells you should work, but you're not looking for a 95% in deer. You're looking for that top 5 or top 2 or top 1% buck that's, like you said, different.
Let me tell you one thing that probably changed the course of my thinking as far as hunting older age bucks. And it wasn't any particular thing that happened. It's more of an idea. But I was a lot younger, and, you would see people kill these big bucks, and I wanted to kill one too. But one thing that I noticed is the real giants that were killed. And whenever I say real giants, I'm talking about the best bucks from my area. A lot of times were killed by people that knew nothing about deer hunting. And they were hunting places that you would never hunt those deer. And so that is one thing that got me to thinking about hunting areas with the least deer sign. And I believe that's one thing that changed my hunting, is just realizing that, hey, I'm hunting places that are just too deery, if that makes sense. I need to hunt the places that are bucky, not deery.
Yeah. That is a big distinguishing thing right there.
Yes.
But yeah, like you said, those big old guys, they don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of kids and moms, right? That's the old grumpy man. This is Clint Eastwood on the front porch saying, "Get out of here. I want to be by myself."
That's a perfect analogy. Clint Eastwood. I like that.
Yep. That's what we're looking for. So with that image in our minds, then I guess that's a good way to wrap this up. Nathan, for folks that want to follow along with your season or see anything else from you, is there anywhere you would direct people to go or to connect with you in any kind of way?
Yeah, I'm just on Instagram. I'm a mountain hunter on there. You can search my name, Nathan Killen, or the Stick Boys. I'm really good friends with those guys. I've got a few scouting videos on their YouTube channel and a couple of deer hunts. I'm no videographer or anything like that, but you can. They've got some really good stuff on there too that they've done. So. But that's the two places. I'm not real social, but I do that a little bit. So
that's great. I've checked out some of those videos and I enjoyed them. There's a nice little bit of a combination of getting to see what you're doing in the field, but then also you explaining what happened or why you did things, or even a couple of them. There's some map breakdowns which were really helpful to see. Yeah. So it's good stuff, Nathan. Man, I really appreciate you taking this time to talk through all this and kind of let me take you down the wormhole and into the minds of these big old deer. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoy anytime anybody wants to sit and listen to me rattle on about them. So, me too. Well, let's plan on doing it again someday down the road, Nathan, and hopefully we'll hear a new story or two about that deer you get a crack at. Hopefully, here in a couple months or weeks. Yep. All right. Good luck this year, Nathan. All right. You too, buddy. Thank you. All right. And that is a wrap. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. We are getting into the season. It is real, my friends. I'm kicking off my first hunt this week. So I will hopefully have a story for you very soon about some exciting hunts. And if nothing else, some lessons learned, which is always an important takeaway from each hunt that we can bring home with us no matter what happens at the end of the day. So, best of luck out there as you get after it. I hope you have a lot of fun. Enjoy the process. The results will follow. Until next week, stay wired to hunt.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. MeatEater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. MeatEater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24th, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.